start with the questions. So, time schedule is a little bit tight because we have to end at 20 past 12. So we have close to 1 hour for the questions. So if some people have any questions, please do not hesitate and ask a question. In English, of course, and not in French. So, question session is open. Yes, first one here.
I've got a question for Mary. When you talked about the characteristics of UK debate, you mentioned the use of CCTV. What does it mean, CCTV? And would you feel so kind as to speak slowly?
Okay. Irish people always speak too fast. So CCTV are the video cameras. So, sorry, yeah, that might not be a term that translates. Sorry. Can people hear?
C'est vrai?
Yeah. Okay, so can people hear? So it's about having video cameras installed essentially, and yeah, there has been this undercover reporting, and clearly that showed the level of abuse, and again many of the things that Brigitte was talking about. So that was the pressure for CCTV, and I think it's interesting that that comes from the public. So the debate in the UK, I suspect the government just don't want to have debates about animal welfare or anything that will bring them into territory now that it's become very contested in the UK. So even surveillance of any slaughterhouse has become quite contested. So a number of them do have them because of these campaigns by charities and some supermarkets will only buy meat from slaughterhouses that use video cameras. But of course no one sees the practices, that's the problem, so they may have these regimes. But I think it's interesting about transparency and also exposing what happens to workers as well as animals, because I think again, and I think that's one of the common points, I suppose that many of the presentations ended on, that for everyone it's a good thing to have that transparency and at least know the information.
Just to talk more about CCTV cameras, I think that in the UK it's not obligatory to have CCTV cameras, and also it is not neutral because it's overseen by the director of slaughterhouses. So my question is, do you think that if it's supervised by neutral people, if there is like a committee to supervise the images made by the CCTV cameras, do you think that it's a global question, not only for you, Ms. Fox, but do you think it would be a good thing, a good proposal to ensure animal welfare in the slaughterhouses? And furthermore, I would just highlight that in France, I think that there is a parliamentary commission that was made public in September, the final report, and they said that it would be a good thing because there is not enough veterinary inspectors to go into all of the different part of the slaughterhouses. So maybe it would be a good thing to have cameras there to balance the efficiency of veterinary inspectors. So we would like to have your ideas about that.
So I think Birgitta has wants to speak.
I don't need that, I think.
You have a strong voice, yes.
Yeah. First of all, now I'm speaking from the Finnish point of view. We have the inspectors, and still it's horrible. So that's not the solution. But of course, it's better to have the inspectors than to be without them. maybe it has have an impact to some of the workers at least. But it's not the solution for the animals. It's important to understand that. And I think Gary Frazione had phrased it quite clearly. All those small things, we try to make it more transparent, the wrong issues to do, is just to find right solutions for wrong things to do. So maybe we should be more focused all together, especially legal scholars. I think we should be more together and really point out what we should achieve for animals, and not be afraid of to use words like animal rights or freedoms or veganism or end of animal farming, or I mean, put it out there. The society is changing all the time, and what we are thinking today is impossible can be possible after amount of years. We have seen it already, a huge development during the last 10 years. If someone would have said to me in the beginning of 2000 that I will, during my lifetime, participate in an animal law conference which is where there is only vegan food, and we are talking about animal rights, I would say never in my lifetime that will happen. And now it has happened. So we need to believe and be uncomfortable in what we are phrasing today, I think.
Okay, just become, I think our students have some question to raise, and then I will come back to the public for other questions. So priority to the students now.
Sorry. So first, thank you for being here and answering our questions. So we have questions to ask you, but only one person will be asked each time because we don't have much time. But if you have other things to say, just feel free to do it. So it's all right. Just try to keep it short because we don't have much time. Thank you.
So first I will just bounce back on what you said, Mrs. Valberg. And I was wondering that, like concerning your aspiration of moving the laws from a more vegan model, how do you consider the process of domestication, and how do you consider the fact that we need to buy pellets for feeding our domesticated animals, and how do you consider also the fact of handling the invasive species?
This is not a way of trying to avoid to answer the question, but I will answer this way, that we don't need to have all the decisions ready for all the problems we meet in the relationship between human and animals. Because only when we stop eating animals, we already reduce so much suffering that after that we have time to deal with other problems we have with animals. So, and at this time of our history, those are the animals we are inflicting mostly suffering on, and also amount of animals. So they are most of animals suffering, and severe sufferings we are causing them. This is short answer.
All right, thank you.
We have a question for Gary. In the videos that we see, what's also shocking is that we see workers abusing the animals. So we wanted to know if there is a specific training for working in a slaughterhouse.
In Switzerland, or in general.
What you know
well,
about
I
it?
I can only answer regarding the situation in Switzerland. The whole slaughtering process is inspected or controlled by veterinarians as well, and the people working there, they have some formation, some training, but they are not really specialized butchers or something like that. We have also to say that this, the work they do, this is hard work with little recognition, social recognition. They are poorly paid also, so the working conditions aren't good at all for them. But they need some, let's say, minimal training, and the whole process is kind of controlled. Sure, this doesn't mean that there are no deficiencies, probably the same thing as in Finland, but it would be wrong to say there is no control, people, they don't know what they do, and so nevertheless the situation for the animals remains really bad there. But we have some minimal training, minimal control there is.
Okay, thank you.
And probably, excuse me, just to add, I can imagine that situation in other countries is worse than in the top countries of Europe.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you. In France, to kill the animals, we have like these methods you mentioned, like electricity, stunning gas, and captive bull pistol. So, what do you think about the efficiency in being painless?
Well, I'm not an expert in these things. I kind of have to trust what the experts say to me, and I think there are stunning methods which really cause immediately the insensitiveness of the animals, and oftentimes exactly the ones who look really bad to us are probably the most efficient. For example, the captive bull is really it's horrible to watch these things, but I think it really causes if it's done rightly, if it's done correctly, it causes the unconsciousness immediately. Others are have to be looked at really critically. For example, the stunning of poultry in water, which is electrified. There are many deficiencies. This method is for decades actually under critique, but it's one of the allowed methods in Switzerland as well. So I did not have the intention to show you Switzerland as the paradise for the animals, because it's not. This is not the truth, and some of the methods I showed you are also have to be looked at really critically.
Okay, thank you. Now a question for Birgitta. I'm sorry, the others' questions will come for you too. In the videos, we also see that they don't comply with the regulations. So we have the feeling that the authorities are not strict enough. For example, after the release of the video, the slaughterhouse is shut down, and then a few weeks later, it starts again as if nothing had happened. So, are there frequent controls, and are there real sanctions?
So, based on the EU law, at the slaughterhouse, there has to be a veterinarian who is the local authority controlling both the meat control and animal welfare control. And there is a meat officer who is trained in to make both also the meat and welfare controls. And the veterinarian and the meat officer is on the slaughterhouse all the time, and their competence is only inside and on the yard of the slaughterhouse. They can't go outside that and, for example, take an administrative action to protect animals. Their competence is only at the slaughter. And everything is based on the EU law. So it's the same thing in all member states of EU. And we have also, as many other countries, implemented in the National Animal Welfare Act and decrees and decisions. So one part of my doctoral thesis was that I looked into all the decisions or cases that had been handled by the regional authority, controlling also the local authority. I looked through, and my assistants, I think it was totally 23,000 cases. Yes, I'm crazy. Yeah, but so I can truly say that even if we have the legislation, even if we have the authority controlling, even if the intention is good for the animal, we are causing every day both legal and illegal suffering to those animals, slaughter animals. And I haven't visited one slaughterhouse where I wouldn't have seen illegal handling or stunning of animals. And if you think, you said you have a poultry slaughterhouse, 8,000 birds per hour. We have also that they are stand with gas during 3 minutes, 9,000 animals per hour. What does one animal in that whole picture? It's nothing. It's a white mass going through the gas chamber. So it's sometimes people are saying when we are talking about these big pictures that you are naive or it will never happen. We have to believe it can happen. We need to be united and strong, because other ways to do it, that's an utopia, to be naive, to think that you can have people to kill animals, living sentient beings from morning to afternoon, and that they would do it properly. I think that's really naive to think. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So I also have a question for Mrs. Valberg, but for the others, the next ones are for the others. Concerning the European directives, when they are transposed in the country, do they try to go further, the directives, or do they limit the measures taken?
Mostly in Finland they don't go further. In some cases, yes, but I would say it's totally dependent on economical values and on the industry. If the industry says, okay, this change in the law is okay, it doesn't impact us so much, then it's okay.
And do you think we should reinforce the directives to be closer to the initial goal?
In my view, as I said in my presentation, the whole fundamental ground for animal welfare legislation is wrong. So we will never, and because it's wrong, it's weak for the animal, the whole construction, is it a directive, regulation, EU law, national law, decree, whatever it is, it's in imbalance because the ground, and now I mean the legal status of animals and the intention of law, it's weak. It's good for us people, but it's not good for animals. So therefore, I don't think that question is... So I think we need to move from unnecessary suffering to necessary use, to think of that when it's necessary for us or the animals to use them. For example, pets. I think we need for our capacity to feel empathy, we need pets. And I think pets need us in many cases too. So with all what I have saying, I don't mean that we should back off our good relationship with animals, but we can't abuse them and exploit them as we do today.
Okay, thank you for your answer. A question for Mrs. Fox. So we have talked a little bit about the transparency. I listened. But do you think a mandatory labeling of the meat origin would be a consequence of this transparency?
Yes. So I would be supportive of people having information. So yeah, again, ideally for all of us, we don't want animals to be products that are consumed. But it seems to me that it's useful to know, I know that's been one of the big debates in the UK, that if we have pigs that are imported, say, from Denmark, where at least the UK rhetoric would be that standards for welfare may not be as high, that people would say they should know. And clearly, a lot of the British public feel quite strongly that they don't want to eat animals that have been killed without stunning. But yeah, so I think labelling is important, but I do also think that there are concerns about how people use that information. And it's hard enough for all of us who've read the work, I think, to be able to deal with that science and say what method of slaughter is better. So it's easier to opt out and say, well, you know, we don't agree with any of it. But yeah, so again, it's that pragmatics, between pragmatics and utopianism. I think that's a really difficult location to be in as an animal advocate. But by and large, I think transparency is a good thing. More information, more labelling.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Thomas. In your country, do you think animal welfare can overcome the freedom of worship?
Well, as you could see from the presentation, the position of the Constitutional Tribunal was that freedom of religion, freedom of worship prevails over animals, but mainly to the current legal situation in which we are today in Poland, meaning that the animals are not mentioned in the Constitution, or animal welfare or animal protection is not explicitly pointed out in the constitutional text as a value to be protected by legal means. So it is protected on the level of statutes. We have an Animal Welfare Act, but on the level of constitutional values, we have only freedom of religion as and nothing to balance it on the same level, I would say. So probably, and this is also the example of Germany, in which the animals were added to the constitution after the similar outcome of the dispute over the religious slaughter, in which the court held a similar conclusion that because only freedom of religion is a constitutional value and animals are not, then it has to be regarded as a higher value than the protection of animals. And then in 2002, as far as I remember, the German constitution has been changed and animals was mentioned and added to the text. And so in Poland, probably in the situation in which the constitution would be changed, and I hope it will happen, and we will add animals somewhere as an explicitly mentioned object of care or protection, then of course the whole reasoning of the Constitutional Court would have to change, because it was one of the foundations on which it was based. If we have explicitly said that protection of animals may be a legitimate ground to limit other fundamental rights that are listed in the Constitution, then of course it may be comparable, and it is not a guarantee that in such a balancing the judges, of course this is a question also of personal attitudes of the particular judges that take part in solving a case, but it would give at least a chance to reasonably argue that according to our constitution, animal welfare may have been granted priority over the freedom of religious practice, of worshiping and so on.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Now a question for Giri. We heard about some open-air slaughterhouse, places where farmers are allowed to kill their animals in the farm where they grew up. So instead of sending them into a centralized slaughterhouse, does it exist in your country? I've heard about it, but we don't really know. And what do you think about it?
Yeah, it exists, but or let's say they are attempts to do this with cattle, and we call it the pasture slaughtering or gunshot method, where cattle are killed by a gunshot in the field, and then also bled there, and only afterwards they are transported into the slaughterhouse for the subsequent process. They are attempts and kind of experiments to do this, and now you will correct me if I'm wrong, but there is only one guy in Switzerland who has permission to do that now, but there was a lot of publicity, so maybe it seems to be a little more than it is in reality. Now there are in Sweden also attempts, and in Finland too, and I think maybe also in Germany, but maybe I'm wrong. Personally, I think I cannot say that's a good thing, but it's a better thing than slaughtering in the slaughterhouse, because if it's done rightly, the animal doesn't have the whole stress of transportation and the whole stress of the surroundings in the slaughterhouse, all the sound and the other animals and the stress. So from this point of view, it's better than the other one. The fundamental problem of killing the animal remains, I think. So I cannot really say that's cool. So, but the attempts are there, and I think there is goodwill with these attempts to cause less stress to the animals. But we are really in a kind of a pioneering phase with this, and we don't know if this method will really establish in Switzerland. So there is not more I can say about this.
Okay, but do you think that then it will be a bit tricky to control if develops?
Well, so these attempts or these experiments were done all under strict control. So with every cow which was shot, there was a controlling veterinarian there, and as always, there are problems with control. But I mean, yeah, sure, and so we have then to establish a system which controls these things. But this cannot be a point to not to do, or cannot be really an argument in order to say, okay, then let's leave it because we cannot really control it. So, yeah, if the controller have to go to every pasture, to every farm, will be tricky. You're right. On the other hand, it's better than the situation in the slaughterhouse for the animals.
Yeah. So I have to ask some other people. So my next question is about transport. Concerning transport, each country has its own regulations. So when the animals are transported from one country to another, which is the regulation that is applied? So I don't know who wants to answer. Maybe someone who has the answer.
So it's depending on if the country if it's a member state of EU or not. So if we talk as France are member state of EU, so it's the regulation 1/2005 on transportation of animals. And actually, interesting enough that you bring that up, because I have yet to showing him a book coming out, I don't remember when, but it's calling The Myth of Enforcement of Regulation number 1/2005 on the protection of animals during transport. It's made by Dr. Alexander Rabich, who has done many years investigation and inspections on the borders in Europe. I thought he visited Sweden a couple of weeks ago. He had done this work together with the NGO Animals Angels. And I thought I knew something about transportation, international transportation. I can just note that I didn't know anything about it. It's horrible. I haven't been able to read this and watch these pictures. And for example, the border between Bulgaria and Turkey, there is approximately 70 cars per day, so it's thousands of animals passing the border from all around EU. So it's horrible. It's really horrible. But yeah, in EU member states, it's the regulation, Council Regulation 1/2005 that it applied.
Thank you. There is organic meat, but what does it change for the animal welfare when it's been killed in an organic way? I don't know who to ask, so who wants to answer? Nobody.
There is no, in the killing, organic doesn't, it's until the killing.
Okay.
So it's
No
organic
difference.
and then it's killed ordinary way,
Okay.
or in ordinary slaughterhouse.
So we ask the question because we often see some stuff about like this, oh, it's organic meat, so it's better for animal and it's the slaughterhouse, but it's changing anything? It's not changing anything?
It's changing what the animal has been eating during the lifetime.
Yes, of course.
And it's changing a little bit how it's kept, not how it's handled, but kept, and that's it.
Yeah.
I have just a precision in France for what I know, and I guess in the EU member states to have the organic certification. The only change I know is for slaughterhouses which have the certification organic. They have to slaughter organic meat or organic animals, like in the morning when everything is cleaned up, and it has to be separated from the arrival of other animals. That's the main requirement. I would say it's more an hygienic kind of certification regarding slaughter of animals, rather than a really welfare oriented kind of certification.
Okay, thank you for this precision.
Okay, so I have two last questions. The first one is for Mrs. Bells, but if someone wants to add something, we have the time for that, so feel free to do it. So it seems that efforts are done for animals' welfare in general and in slaughterhouses, but it also seems that the law diverges according to species. One of the most striking examples is a discrimination made between livestock and pets. What do you think about this speciesism?
Well, it's for me the question,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so I will answer very straightforward because that's my way to be.
Okay.
And the law in itself is speciesist, is deeply speciesist. It's first meant by human for humans, right? So even today, with all animal laws and legislation that we have at every level, it's legislators giving obligations to humans, either positive obligations to better treat animals with enrichment or other like so-called the 5 freedom, you know, like to feed animals properly and keep them in a good environment, etc. And negative obligations or interdictions not to do things. But for now, of course, animals, as you know, don't have any legal rights recognized. So it's even with so-called good intent, and some legislation are pretty progressive because it should we can say it. Like, for me, it's with some bans, when some activities are clearly banned because recognized as cruel, like in the, I would say the most common are for commonly recognized as cruel activities like bullfighting or foie gras, or fur farming. It's developing more and more, animals in circuses, these kind of things. This is going more and more. So for some people, we are moving from first a humanist approach, then we move to more welfarist, and some say that we're moving to a more sectorial abolitionist kind of perspective. But for my point of view, we cannot move to a truly abolitionist approach as far as the fundamentals, as Birgitta said, remain specific. So all the law as we see and we learn and we know it now should be reviewed in the sense, in a more anti-specious way, in considering living beings are as similar, with similar interests, and most of all humans and animals, and reconsidering the basics of law in another way, in a more fair way. Because if the purpose of law is justice, then we can reconsider the law for a global justice for all, and in interconnection with all the interests of humans, animals, and nature itself too. Yes?
Yeah, I would like to add taking the opportunity of this answer, but my reservations, so to say, concern the general, let's say, general approach that emerges from the answers during the session. From the, let's say, most fundamental philosophical perspective, we have actually two separate problems. The first is the problem of suffering, and the second is the problem of killing. And they are to some extent combined, but to some extent they are separable, I would say. So we have one problem of inflicting pain, suffering, fear on animals, and we have a separate problem of just taking life of animals for our purposes. And relying on this distinction, the more specific problems concerning with both these, let's say, fundamental problems are different. In case of suffering, the reducing of suffering, reduction of suffering, we have actually the problem of this means of enforcement. The problem is not that we have insufficient laws in the sense of standards that are prescribed them, but those standards are really usually at odds with reality in most countries in which they are introduced. So the law says one thing and the reality is usually completely different due to the fact that the enforcement is very poor and cultural attitudes are also insufficient to secure, let's say, the conformity with that law. So as a legal theorist by profession, for me the two basic mechanisms of proper functioning of law are enforcement by authorities and cultural attitudes that more or less accordant with the letter of the law. In case of animal protection, animal welfare legislation, we usually are lacking both. So we have poor enforcement and cultural attitudes that dominating cultural attitudes that are completely different than the message from the, and that's why this reduction of suffering goes to so poorly as it looks from actually all our presentations. And on the other hand, we have this fundamental problem of abolishing of killing animals in such a massive scale at least. But in this sense and in respect of this problem, I have a rather different approach, meaning that I don't believe that we are able to achieve that by means of, let's say, advocacy or legal changes. The only realistic change to abolish this killing animals on a massive scale for food is just the progress in technology. And it is actually somewhere on the horizon that we may be able to produce meat without using living animals and without inflicting any pain actually and killing animals by technology of producing meat by in vitro technology, just from cells that are taken painlessly from animals. And this is the only, in my opinion, realistic perspective of just the end of killing animals from a massive scale. But waiting until it happens shouldn't paralyze us in respect of this first problem, that is reducing suffering, because this is something that we are able to do if only we are able to improve the enforcement before any breakthrough in terms of using animals as such for farming or food purposes happen, because we are not able to predict. It may happen in 10 years, but it may happen in 50 years. So the scale of suffering that will still take place until it happens is unpredictable and anyway enormous. So this is our moral duty to try to do what is feasible in the meantime until the real change may happen. Sorry for the too long intervention.
May I just
Yes, of course.
Okay. Yeah, so indeed, I think that if we would enforce properly what we already have, the situation would be a bit less, reducing the suffering. I agree with you. But still, there is the question of avoidable suffering and killing, which is the same idea. I mean, it's avoidable attempts to animals' life and integrity and animals themselves. So, I think the question can be posed already today. And rather than producing meat in labs with thousands of or billions of euros or dollars or whatever, there is accessible food which is already, here. So there's probably no, I guess this question of changing, it's one of other fundamental in the law, and Birgitta also raised it before with the question of necessity, and you said necessary use, but just instead of saying unnecessary suffering or killing, avoidable suffering and killing. Can it be avoided with other means? Yes, for most of the case. So that, so now we can indeed work on proposing all the solutions, the alternative projects and methods to, I know it's, the next step, but this question can already be posed seriously to lawyers, legislators, politicians, and to the citizens and consumers.
Two things. First of all, the avoidable suffering. In the work before the law, documentary to the law in Finland, unnecessary suffering is defined as avoidable suffering. So it's already there and it doesn't function. So we need to rethink the whole picture. And I agree with you about the necessary and the enforcement and that kind. But actually, I think that every time we say that we need to wait for the technology to, in a realistic way, end the killing, I think it's a little bit, it's a way to try to avoid actually the real problem, because we can already now bring this issue up, and everyone is in this room, I'm sure you are thinking about your own eating behavior after these 2 days. I'm sure about that, at least for a while. So, and hopefully you're changing your behavior if needed. So, and actually, this is my last point. We can't wait, because we are sitting on a ticking bomb, how we are exploiting animals. First of all, because of the suffering we are causing them. But if we don't look at that, so many animals are transported around the globe now. And they are bleeding, they are giving birth, they are sick, they are injured. We are sitting on the ticking bomb with illnesses, which can spread globally like this. Shall we wait for that? No, I don't think so. We know that farming is causing enormous environmental problems to the globe. We have a responsibility for the coming generations to fix this now.
And for ours too already.
Yeah.
Also for the current
But I'm so
generation.
old.
Don't exaggerate.
Okay, I'm finished.
Okay, thank you. So we have just one last question. Even if, according to what we heard, I think we can guess your answer. But how would you improve the animal welfare if you had no limits? And it's for everybody.
Sabine, start.
Well, of course, I guess to see animals and all animals happy is a dream for all animal lovers. Of course, animal lovers too. Knowing that the current system of species domination of all the rest of the creation or nature and animals is causing a huge amount of suffering. Yeah, probably reversing this violent tendency that we begin to see as such, because before it was natural, normal, necessary to do so, but now we realize that no, it's not normal, it's not moral at all, and it's not even necessary. So what should we do with that? And yeah, so my dream would be yeah, to see, of course, and it's not it's a common dream, I guess, shared by a lot of people here that I know. Yeah, it's just to see them free from this slavery system and suffering, torturing system, and just, yeah, to be free as we can be, and yeah, and happy to live their life as they want it.
I think it's very very much lawyer's perspective, but I think very key to this is the object status of animals. So thinking about them not being property, the visibility, the seeing, I think is really important in this. So seeing the abuse. But I think I am a little bit less optimistic about, yeah, that prospect of change. And I think it's really interesting to think about technology. I was reading, I don't know if people have read it, but Karis Thompson, who's an American sociologist, has just written a book on good science. So it's looking at these debates in the context of stem cell research in particular, and I think it's very interesting there too. So she's arguing that in the past in science, that what was seen as being good science, which is very much founded on using animals, has now become not only bad ethics, but it's bad science as well. And I think because I do feel a bit less optimistic about people changing, so I think it's great that there's so many people here. I think there are trends, the idea of veganism being cool, all these things are important, but I think there's just such cultural and economic investment in animal cruelty. And yeah, so that's the big limit. If you could remove that, that would be great. But in the meantime, I think Thomas's points about technology are just really interesting. I know that's the answer, but...
But I would just follow this way of thinking and add that it depends if you imagine such a change in terms of the let's say changing the individual attitudes of people. And of course it would be the optimal way that if you ask what would you change in our approach to animals if you had no limits, and if you understand this having no limits in a way that everybody would be happy with what I would propose, then of course the optimal situation would be the total abolishment of animal exploitation, perhaps with one small exception with pet animals, because as you know, those extremely radical abolitionists also argue against the domestication and keeping animals as pets. I'm not as radical as they. But if we exclude such a utopian scenario of changing the individual attitudes of everybody, then we have to be very cautious thinking about changing in law, because the basic truth about that is that the content of the law cannot be too far away from what people really expect, think, want, believe, and so on and so on. So as long as this social change on a massive scale doesn't happen, then if you improve the legal regulations too much, then you risk that this law will remain empty and dead, that letter, because it is possible that the law somehow stimulates also the social change, but on condition that it is a little bit more progressive than the general attitude, but not too much. The difference is not too big.
Okay, when you said no limits, you were also saying no limits in time, right?
Yeah.
So it can be, of course, it won't work in adopting something that the society is ready for, but that's also why in our project matrix we put like every steps to make, from the short term to mid-term to longer term to the total abolition. Because of course it has to be progressive, but every revolution, either moral and legal, didn't happen in one day. It has always been a progressive thing for the society to adapt the law, etc., with a better, and the progress is already happening every day, even if it's not visible all the time, but there is new laws. Like, I have to update this database every week, because there is new laws and amendments and proposals and projects that are going always further. And now Luxembourg is proposing a law stating that animals can be recognized as owner of rights. We don't know what will happen with this project, but still, it's the first time that a law is proposing to go so far. So, and there's new bans every day for circuses, for whatever. So it's really moving on every day. That's my belief, and so I think that we can propose always better laws, yes, in increasing all the time, but never forgetting where we want to go. It's like climbing a mountain, I guess. If you just look at your foot, you're not motivated. If you look, oh wow, I want to reach this summit, but I'm not a giant, I cannot do the mountain in one step. But if I go step by step, and if I'm endurance, and if I never lose my focus, I can go there. And I'm sure that's what we can think of.
You want me to add also something?
If you want.
I think we are quite short of time, and I don't want to repeat everything because I agree mostly. I'm a little more optimistic on the value of the law, really, because I think we all agree the utopia would be that we don't need any rules for the handling of animals, because we treat them naturally as sentient beings, as our co-creatures or whatever, but this is not happening. So I think with strong laws and mostly with the really consistent enforcement of these laws, we as lawyers, we have the tools to change the attitudes a little. Okay, this has to come along with the change in conscious also towards animals, but I believe as a lawyer in the law, and especially for the protection of animals, because they cannot really defend themselves. So they need somebody with the tool, and I'm really convinced that the law is a good tool for the animals. So if I have no limits, I would probably really improve the laws, make them stricter for the protection for the animals, and then hoping that also our attitudes as a society, our how we face and how we deal with animals would change.
Okay, shortly. I agree totally. As we know, the real changes in society has become through bans or rights, and the society has never been ready for them. Think just of the ban to smoke inside, or what the discussions and almost protesting we had in the society when that ban came to. And today I think we all accept it as a really nice thing, actually. Same thing with women's right to vote. One argument was it doesn't fit in the legal terminology. Today we think it's obvious that women also have right to vote. So I think, I believe as you in the legal tools, we can do a lot as human beings, but also with legal terms. And for animals, this is my last comment. I was interviewed by Sabine yesterday for GAL project, and you asked me what is my dream for animals. And my biggest dream for animals is that we humans would step down from the pedestal we had put ourselves up on and start to live with dignity with the common fellows we are sharing this planet with. Thank you for being here.
Thank you to all for your answers and your presence. And if the audience wants to ask questions. Okay, sorry, there's no time for it.
Thank you very much to the students and to the panel of speakers. To close the today session of question and answers, I just want to ask one. Maybe if we have one additional minute, a second question, and would ask for your personal opinion in less than 30 seconds. So it's first question, do you think that the right of animals to not suffer should trump the freedom of belief and of religion? Sabine, 30 seconds.
Attends, tu peux plus clairement, ça donne quoi? En français, vas-y, peut-être.
En français, est-ce que tu penses que le droit de l'animal à ne pas souffrir devrait l'emporter sur la liberté de conscience et d'exercice de pratiquer sa religion?
I think that my freedom of consciousness would be for animals to have the right not to suffer. But as far as it can be conflicting with the interpretation of religion by some people, because all religions, all philosophy agree on the need to respect living beings. I mean, from the basic principles texts, you find this common ground, like love and peace and respect for similar people, in every religion and philosophy having a kind of religious spirit, like Buddhism or
Time over.
other. Voilà. So it's not incompatible with the basic letter of the text, with the spirit of respecting life in all its form. It's not incompatible with the right not to suffer. On the contrary, it's compatible.
Thank
It's just the interpretation of religion
Thank you. Sorry to
that made it incompatible.
Yes, I'm done. I would agree with that, because I think we want to avoid that polarization between rights, because I think that is where animal activists might lose out. So my own personal view would be yes, but I think in that debate we might lose. So yeah, I'd be looking for the common ground.
One sentence for me, it is absolutely obvious and unquestionable that in deliberate inflicting pain or suffering is a limit of religious freedom, whether it concerns human beings or animals. It doesn't matter.
Okay, Gary?
I'm even shorter because I agree.
I think if your personal belief system has a victim, it shouldn't be a personal belief system anymore. And there the legal balancing comes in, and there I agree totally with you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can close today's session on this conclusion. And thank you to all of you to be patient. And I'm sorry that Carlos could not join us today. Hope it will be next year. So I desperately read my emails, but sorry.
Merci Jean-Marc, merci Cédric.
Merci aux étudiants.
So we will begin the afternoon session at 2. On va recommencer la session en français à 2h de l'après-midi. For people who will join us to the restaurant, just stay there, so everybody of you. And pour ceux qui nous rejoignent au restaurant, restez ici. Pour les autres, du coup, je vous demanderai de sortir pour qu'on puisse fermer la pièce. Merci beaucoup.